This truly is a Togetherhood Breakfast. Not only does it bring each year local organizations together like the City of Glendale, YWCA, YMCA, and our host, gracious host today, Dignity Health Glendale Memorial. It also brings together a family. You're all here, and might I add, very early in the morning. And let's be honest, it's really hard to get family to sit together early in the morning, right before you go to school or before you go to work. How hard is that? So we've done that today, and so I really want to thank you for being here. So next, I'd like to invite the Glendale Police Department to present the colors.
Blue, 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 right, blue, 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 detail, hope, right, peace, present, oh.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Order. Oh. Colors. Pose.
Thank you. You can be seated. All right, so I'd like to jump straight into our program and invite our mayor, Ara Najarian, to the podium to welcome you to our annual MLK breakfast.
Thank you, Eliza. Let's hear it for Eliza. What a great MC she is. Well, good morning, everyone. And it is a little bit earlier than I usually start my day, but the energy that I draw from all of you makes up for the few minutes of sleep that I missed. And good morning. On behalf of the City of Glendale and my council colleagues, whom I believe we still have, Paula Devine. Is there another one here? Paula, thank you, Paula, for coming. It's easy for the mayor to come to these things because he has to speak and perform some functions. But there are so many events that we as council members are invited to. Paula is almost at every single one. So thank you, Paula, for supporting this great event today. Thank you for joining us for this important event to honor the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. When we remember the work of such a great leader, we're reminded of his dedication to ending racial and economic inequality and his efforts to bringing communities together. Regardless of the obstacles placed at his feet, Dr. King demonstrated a rare form of empathy. Now, differing from sympathy, which is a feeling of sorrow for someone else's misfortune, empathy is the ability to understand and share another person's feelings and perspectives, to figuratively walk in someone else's shoes. Dr. King is an example of how we can all play a part in creating an environment capable of fostering a community of empathy if we just take a minute to walk in someone else's shoes. To hear and see people, all people, and understand how people on both sides of an issue actually feel. The City of Glendale is proud to be a partner of this Togetherhood Breakfast, once again, and joined in partnership by the Glendale YMCA, Dignity Health, Glendale Memorial Hospital and Health Center, and the YWCA of Glendale. Thanks to these organizations, civic pillars of our community, for their contributions to making this event possible for another year. Let's all leave this room today with the mission of fostering a community of empathy. Enjoy the breakfast and the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, before I invite our next speaker to the podium, I'd like to introduce our council member who just joined us, Varej Agajanian. Thank you for being here. Okay, so now please welcome again our gracious host and president and CEO of Dignity Health Glendale Memorial Hospital and Health Center, Jill Welton.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome to Glendale Memorial. I'm glad you're all here. We're honored to host the 4th annual Martin Luther King Jr. Breakfast in collaboration with the City of Glendale and Glendale YWCA and Glendale YMCA. I'm going to continue on the theme of our mayor, as it's so important, not only in everyday life, certainly in healthcare, but most importantly in the environment that we're in right now. So today we remember the life and legacy of Dr. King, and we celebrate those who continue to move his vision forward in our community. Dr. King once said, "True compassion is more than flipping a coin to a beggar. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring." For Dr. King, empathy is deeply connected with action and transformation. His legacy invites us to consider how we can extend empathy to those around us in very real and concrete ways. At Glendale Memorial and Dignity Health, we speak about empathy as human kindness. Human kindness asks us to consider what actions we can take to ensure our patients and family receive the best care possible at their most vulnerable moments. Human kindness and empathy are very powerful terms which turn to action, change lives. We are grateful for our partners in this room who are committed to demonstrating empathy into action to ensure all human beings are afforded the opportunity to thrive and flourish in Glendale. Thank you for being here today with us on a very special and important occasion.
Thank you, Jill. Next, I'd like to welcome George Cycli of the Glendale YMCA and partner of today's event to the podium.
Thank you, Eliza. Good morning, everyone. Before I start, I'd like to recognize the Foothill YMCA, Vince Ywca. I have to look at your last name, sorry. The Foothill YMCA services the Montrose area and La Crescenta. Together, we're really a strong force in creating positive impact along with all of you in Glendale. The Togetherhood idea is actually a YMCA initiative called Togetherhood. So I got intrigued by it because it creates a difference of how you define neighborhoods. Neighborhood to me is just the buildings, the trees, etc. That's the structure. Togetherhood is the spirit. And I truly believe we have a long way to go in creating that togetherhood in a neighborhood. I'm going to give you 2 examples. When us at the Y, one example, we did not do a good job. Another one, we did. Mostly, some of you are members at the Y, and they know I'm always all over the building. And I would happen to be in the locker room. And I know guys, and one guy came in, I'm talking with him. I know he lives on Chevy Chase. Another guy came in, and I know him also. And I remembered, I said, wait a minute, he lives on Chevy Chase. I said, do you guys know each other? They looked at each other, yeah, we see each other at the Y. I said, you live on Chevy Chase, you live, yeah. I said, you guys live in the same area. So they looked at each other, said, you know, I thought I've known you from somewhere, but I thought it was the Y. Okay, we did not do a good job at the Y connecting. 3 days ago, I was by the membership counter, and a family was joining, and they were talking about karate, martial arts for the kids. So I start talking to the lady about the importance of, because the way we do martial arts is more focused on values, respect, and teaching discipline. She said, yeah, and I enjoyed we carried a conversation. She said, let me introduce you to my husband. Her husband came, introduced himself as Alex. He said, while I was growing up in Glendale, I spent most of my afternoons at the Y. As a matter of fact, all my friends today came from that time. And then we all came from Glendale High School, Hoover High School. We bonded, and we're still friends till today. I left for a while, and now I'm coming back with my whole family. He said people don't realize the opportunities, how you build communities. That is a good example. I would like to see us do more and more of this example versus, oh yeah, we live on the same neighborhood, but I thought I met you at Hawaii. It's important to have the spirit, and this is, you know, the reflection on some of Dr. King's philosophy. Choose love, not hate. Okay, caring is one of the YMCA's big values, and if you care about someone, you need to get to know them first. So that's the whole concept of Togetherhood. And how did we come up with this concept? I talked to former city manager Scott Ywca, and I said, I've noticed there is no activities in Glendale during MLK week or birthday. He said, no, we do it at the city. I said, yeah, but city staff and the school. But how about the whole community? And we looked around and there was nothing, so we started this breakfast. We connected with Casey and we connected with the city and a few other entities. And now we're celebrating the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King in Glendale. Thank you.
Thanks, George. Next, I'd like to welcome Todd Leonard, Senior Pastor at Glendale City Church, to the front for an inspirational message.
In 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King joined and organized with other groups to do protests in the city of Birmingham, Alabama. And after beginning their work and their nonviolent protests in the city, Dr. King was arrested and put in the city jail in Birmingham. And from there, he wrote one of his most famous letters, the letter from the Birmingham Jail. His letter was in response to local clergy in Birmingham who published an op-ed in the Birmingham paper saying that, and the title of the article was A Call for Unity, but in the article it was basically saying, Dr. King, you are an outsider and you have no business here, and let the people and the citizens of Birmingham handle things themselves. You are not bringing unity, but division. Someone got a newspaper to Dr. King in jail, and then he began writing his response. Each paragraph of his letter is worthy of reflection and meditation, but allow me to just quote these words from early in his letter. He says, it really boils down to this, that all life is interrelated. We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied into a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. In his letter, he says, there are no outsiders. We are all one people, no matter what town we call our home, no matter what our background is, we are all one people. I have never written a letter as eloquent as Dr. King, but if you don't mind, I'd like to share a few thank you notes that I've written to people in my life, people who I had no quibble with, no quarrel with, people who I believed were good people, but who were outsiders to me. People that I didn't believe mattered to my destiny. But people who now I owe a huge debt of gratitude to. Thank you, Keith Wood and Tom Jessup, for inviting me to join the leadership of the predominantly black Buckhead Community Fellowship in Atlanta in 2007. Your hope in inviting me to pastor there was that I would help create a more diverse congregation by drawing in more people who looked like me. Well, I'm sorry that during my time there, I drove the remaining 6 white people away from the church. I'm so grateful that I was given the privilege and challenge of doing church life where I was in the minority. I'm thankful that this time with you exposed some prejudice within me that I had not yet dealt with. And I am honored beyond words that by the time I moved from that congregation, many had grown to accept and trust me as a brother. Thank you, Joe and Mary Green, for making me an adopted adult son in your home so that I could get to know and love your daughter, Cheri, and then get to know and love her wife and her daughter. I had been wrestling for some time with what I had been taught in my Christian upbringing and what I was coming to understand about the troubling experiences of individuals who identify as LGBTQ, especially those born and raised in families of devout faith. Seeing Cheri's ordinary yet magnificent family and your pride in them settled the issue in my mind. Because you, Joe and Mary, opened the door to your family, I have been welcomed with open arms into many more families. And the LGBTQ relatives in my own family now know my door will always be open to them, and that they will always have a seat at my table and a guest room waiting for them. Thank you, Dr. Johnny Ramirez Johnson, anthropology professor at Fuller Theological Seminary, my fellow pastor at Glendale City Church, and a dear friend, for helping me better understand the frustrations of being a scholar of color, but only being celebrated for being energetic and entertaining, but rarely appreciated for your intellectual brilliance and prodigious scholarship. Because of your gracious confrontation of my similar stereotyping behavior, I have learned how to better love you and how to love and respect others in your field who share your experience. Thank you, Mary Kayat, Anush Keshazade, Robert Ohanian, Dr. Armene Zombri, Father Vaskin Mofsessian, and so many Americans of Armenian descent for embracing me as a friend since I moved to Glendale 9 years ago. Before arriving, I had almost no knowledge of Armenia, its history, the diaspora. I didn't know hardly anything. And I didn't know what it would mean to live in a city with almost 100,000 people of Armenian descent, whether they were from the United States, Lebanon, Iran, Russia, or Armenia. But because each of you took the time to sit with me over a cup of coffee, whether it was American or Armenian, or in your home eating your simple refreshments, which in my home would be equivalent to the amount of food we serve at Thanksgiving dinner, because you shared the joys, sorrows, triumphs, and tragedies and allowed me to ask a lot of questions, I now know that my identity and my destiny will be forever connected with each one of you. That after a few years in the city, that it would become extremely important to me, of no Armenian heritage, to see the House and Senate pass resolutions in just the last couple of months to finally recognize that there was indeed genocide that happened in 1915, speaks to how important my friends of Armenian descent are now to me. And my celebration is because I know it was important to my friends. To all of you, thank you for becoming my friends, for no longer being outsiders to me. Your destinies are now interwoven with mine, and our stories now continue together.
Thank you, Todd, for those beautiful words. Next, I'd like to welcome Tara Peterson, Executive Director of YWCA Glendale, and partner of today's event. She will be introducing you to our keynote speaker this morning. Thanks, Tara.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank George and Eliza and also Cassie for allowing me to be part of the planning committee this year. Last year I had the honor and privilege of being the keynote speaker, and when I was asked to speak immediately from the city of Glendale, when I was invited to speak, I was like, well, I know someone else who can speak. And they were like, well, no, Tara, we really want to hear from you. And I was wanted to shy away from it, mainly because I felt like there's probably somebody more qualified, somebody maybe who has more experience that can speak. And they said, no, we really want to be able to lift your voice. And so I really appreciated the opportunity to be able to have a voice last year at this event, but I also appreciated the opportunity to be a part of this planning committee. And I just want everyone to know that a lot of thought and intention was in this program. We came together, we met during lunch, we met via conference call to really make sure that this event was intentional and inclusive of all communities. And so I'm really honored to be a part of that. Lift as you climb is a personal mantra. It is a guiding principle in my life, woven in the fabric of my character by my personal experiences. And so that was why I felt it was important for somebody else to come and speak besides me, because I really feel like my role in this community is to lift the voices of other people in the community, voices that we don't often hear with all the different meetings we go to and the different events that we go to within the city of Glendale. And so I had an opportunity to meet a group called Black in Glendale. One of the things I think most Black folks do when they go to a new community, they Google, where are the Black people? It's something we do because we want to find out where the Black community is. And so I did that when I came to Glendale, and I found that there was a group called Black in Glendale, founded by Tanita, who's here with us today. And so I reached out to this group, joined their Facebook page, and I had an opportunity of meeting so many amazing African American women and men and children that are a part of this community that I don't often see in events that I go to across the city of Glendale. And so I made it my personal mission to make sure that not only do I make sure that I am present at places, but that I also opportunities to bring those folks to the table as well. And one of the women that I met during that time is Reverend Cheri James. I'm not going to read her bio because you can all read that, but what I will say to you is when I first met Reverend Cheri James, I was so truly inspired by her. She is one of those people that even before she speaks, she touches your soul. And growing up in a biracial and being raised by a white mother, I never was introduced to the Black church until I was like 13 years old, and it was life-changing the first time I went to an African American church. And so she reminds me of that. She reminds me of that feeling, that spirit of when you first walk into an African American church. So we are all in for an amazing, amazing, amazing experience today. And I hope that you all leave here inspired and touched by her as I have been touched by her. I see her as a role model. I see her as a mentor. I see her as a sister. And so without further ado, I would like to welcome our keynote speaker today, Reverend Cheri James.
Who was she talking about? That's amazing. I want to say, oh, goodness. Can I have water, please? I want to say thank you to Tara, thank you to the planning committee, Cassie, who I get to know on the Glendale Religious Leaders Association, which I love. It's like an awesome group. I want to thank the members of Black in Glendale that are here, and my members from Understanding Principles, who, what you guys don't know is that our church is down in Inglewood, which means that, thank you, that a lot of our people live like south. And so I want to acknowledge, because I know you had to get up early. I know you had to make it through the traffic to get here. And so I just want to acknowledge you for being here. And then thank you to just everyone who's present. It is a gift to be here with you. I consider all people divine expressions of the one presence and the one power. And so I just want to recognize and salute that presence in you. I want to acknowledge how great you are. I want to acknowledge how special you are. And I want to thank you for the consciousness for putting this together. That Dr. King, I have given speeches about Dr. King over the years, and I'm always grateful when someone says we should recognize this man. I think that he is a singular force to be reckoned with, and hopefully after this conversation you'll have a sense of why it matters that we celebrate him, and why it's important that we keep what he gave to our country alive, because he's one of our own. Yes? He's one of our own. Now, listen, I was blessed to actually speak yesterday with UCLA Health. So this is, I got a dry run. But I learned something about myself. I learned that I need an amen. So I want to encourage you to speak up. Speak up. You don't have to be quiet. In fact, it makes me nervous if you're quiet because it makes me think you're not getting it. So, if you can just raise your hand like, yes, you're speaking to me. All of that is going to make me feel good, and it's going to let me know that we're actually like connected. Okay, can we agree with that? Okay, all right, it's okay. So my intention this morning is really to offer a perspective on Dr. King's life that will awaken in you a fire that no man can put out. I want to remind you of something that you have always known, that you have the spark of greatness inside you. My intention this morning is to remind you that that spark can become an eternal flame, but only you can fan it. Only you can turn that spark into a flame. And so my hope is that our exchange lifts your spirit, reminds you of your greatness, and compels you to use it. Now, I don't have the luxury of knowing what you know about Dr. King, so if you will indulge me, I want to share the parts of his life and his experience that touched me deeply. And I want to share with you, quite frankly, the stuff that when I researched him and getting ready for today, that really honestly just wouldn't leave me alone. There were just things that I came across and impressions that touched my heart that I would go to sleep thinking about it, and I would wake up thinking about it, and I figured, well, I probably should talk to you about it. I think one of the tragic things about history is that the further that we get away from a moment in time, the less we grasp the context in which a person operated during their lifetime. And so the further that we move away from the lifetime of Dr. King, the less we understand all of the things that kind of went into what was happening at that time. And in a macro sense, we get it. We know that, racism was rampant and segregation was pretty much the order of the day. Police brutality was just a norm. This is what happened. Everyday whites, I grew up in a time in Houston where things were segregated, but they weren't. I didn't live during the 60s. I was born after that time, so don't do your calculations yet. He was assassinated before I was born, let me say that. But my mom grew up, and she said the whites in Beaumont, Texas would allow their children to throw food on you as you walk down the street. And the way this came up was that I used to have a convertible car. And my mom, we live in a different time, but she's like, I will never buy a convertible car because you could drive down the street and they would throw food or trash in your car. So this was just the order of the day. Now, but this morning, I really want to just kind of drill down and get to the nuance, the context of Dr. King's life, because I want to help you understand what made this man so special that a nation rooted in bigotry and racism would decide to set aside a work day to celebrate his life. And so to the best of my ability, I want to transport us back to the 50s and the 60s that saw this young man from Georgia emerge as one of the nation's most prominent leaders. And I want to give you a framework to really make sense of how this singular life transformed our nation and literally shifted the course of our destiny. Because today everybody praises King, right? Even the racists cite him. Yes. They point to him as a paradigmatic model of what it looks like to advocate for civil rights. And usually they do it in contrast to the young activists of the Black Lives Matter movement because they want to say how they're doing it wrong. And so you would think that the way that we rhapsodize about King, that he had no enemies, right? For most people, he's the dude that walked in the streets, arms linked together, singing, "We shall overcome someday," right? He's the I have a dream man. And the 12 years that he spent struggling with people for civil rights have been collapsed into a few famous speeches and quotes. And so if it's okay with you, I kind of want to expand what has been collapsed by the storytellers of history. Would that be okay? Yes. Good. So I want to start with his own words. And I want to start at the end. So it is the 4th of February, 1968, literally 2 months to the day before he is assassinated. And he is giving a sermon called The Drum Major Instinct. Now, I really wish I had time to read the entire sermon to you because it's powerful. It is a veritable class on personal ethics. But Dr. King had this way of just awakening you to your personal responsibility to live an ethical life. And not really for religious reasons, but because it's the only sane way to live in an environment with diverse and different people. And often the spotlight of history gets shined on his wake-up call to America, right? That's what we remember, and the call to America to do right by her oppressed masses. But Dr. King was just as fervent in his message to the oppressed masses to see themselves differently. He would say, when you're marching, you're standing up. And that's important because a man can only stand on your back if it's bent. And so in this sermon, which would turn out to be his final sermon, he ironically, or maybe prophetically, eulogizes himself. He literally says, literally 2 months to the day before he dies, what I want you to say at my funeral. And these are his words. Every now and then, I guess we all think realistically about that day when we will be victimized with what is life's final common denominator. That's something that we call death. We all think about it. And every now and then, I think about my own death and I think about my own funeral. And I don't think of it in a morbid sense. And every now and then I ask myself, what is it that I want said? If any of you are around when I have to meet my day, I don't want a long funeral. And if you get somebody to deliver the eulogy, tell them don't talk too much. Tell them not to mention that I have a Nobel Prize because that's not important. Tell them not to mention that I have 300 or 400 other awards because that's not important. Tell them don't mention where I went to school. I'd like somebody to mention that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to give his life serving others. I'd like for somebody to say that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to love somebody. I want you to say that day that I tried to be right on the war question. I want you to be able to say that day that I did try to feed the hungry. And I want you to be able to say that day that I did try in my life to clothe those who were naked. I want you to say on that day that I did try in my life to visit those who were in prison. I want you to say that I tried to love and serve humanity. Yes, if you want to say that I was a drum major, say that I was a drum major for justice. Say that I was a drum major for peace. I was a drum major for righteousness, and all the other shallow things will not matter. I won't have any money to leave behind. I won't have the fine and luxurious things of life to leave behind. But I just want to leave a committed life behind. And that's what I want to say. If I can help somebody as I pass along, if I can cheer somebody with a word or song, if I can show somebody that he's traveling wrong, then my living will not be in vain. If I can do my duty as a Christian ought, if I can bring salvation to a world once wrought, if I can spread the message as the Master taught, then my living will not be in vain. Yes, Jesus, I want to be on your right side or your left side, but not for any selfish reason. I want to be on your right side or your left side, not in terms of some political kingdom or ambition, but I just want to be there in love and in justice and in truth and in commitment to others so that we can make of this old world a new world. Literally 2 months later, on April 4th, 1968, he would be shot to death on a balcony while stepping out for a breath of fresh air. After the successful conclusion of the Montgomery bus boycott of 1955, Dr. King and several other leaders formed an organization called the Southern Christian Leadership Council. It was formed for the express purpose of redeeming the soul of America. Their position was that racism was a mental illness, and to be cured of racism meant that the soul needed to be redeemed. In his famous letter from a Birmingham jail, King writes that racism and segregation, that what happens is that it distorts the soul and the personality of the one who hates, because it gives the segregator the false sense of superiority, and it gives the segregated a false sense of inferiority. Now, I have always thought that we put too much emphasis on the recipients of racial violence and prejudice, and not enough attention on what the hate does to the one who's hating. Because it's assumed that the hater is in a better position. But no matter how you slice it, both the jailer and the jailed are in jail. And so you never know what you miss out on when you insist on the oppression or the degradation of another human being. What you keep from another, you actually keep from yourself. But you can't see it because all of your attention is on what you're withholding. You see, the hate you give always has a way of finding its way back into your house, your family, your community. The lack of compassion and action in the 80s, shown during the crack epidemic, has now come back as the opioid crisis of the 2000s. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Everything is interconnected. And so King kept trying to get America to wake up to the collision course that she was on if she didn't do something about the oppressed masses. He said, we still have a choice today. Nonviolent coexistence or violent co-annihilation. This may well be mankind's last chance to choose between chaos or community. No man is an island entire of itself. Each is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, America is the less. As well as if a house were, or as well as if a manor of my own, or if my own friend's house. Every person's death diminishes me, for I am involved in humankind. Therefore, sin not to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. King saw racism as a mental illness, and just as you wouldn't put down or hate the person with cancer in the body, neither should you hate or put down the person with cancer in the mind. He saw nonviolent protest as a means of healing this cancer of the mind, because nonviolent protest causes the racist to see himself or herself. Nonviolent protest literally holds a mirror up to America's face so that she can see herself. You see, there was this narrative that had been sold around the world about the oppressed blacks in America. It had been sold through books, through TV, through all kinds of media, through movies that traveled around the world. Nonviolent protest rewrote that narrative. TV was still new in those days, and in 1963, Birmingham was known as one of the most racist cities in the South. Dr. King described it as a symbol of hardcore resistance to integration. Activists had nicknamed it Birmingham because of the frequency of violent attacks against those fighting the system of segregation. In May 1963, they launched the Children's Crusade and began a march on Birmingham. Students from all over the state of Birmingham joined in. By the time they got to Birmingham, they're walking by foot now. By the time they got to Birmingham, there were over 3,000 children marching. They gathered at the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, and then they spilled out in groups of 50, marching nonviolently toward downtown. And although they marched nonviolently, the infamous Commissioner of Public Safety, Bull Connor, brought out fire hoses and attack dogs and turned them on those children, those babies. It was a scene that caused headlines around our nation and around the world. Seeing those children mauled by police dogs and blown back by the sheer force of water from a fire hose touched the conscience of a nation and the world. Because you see, concomitant with the narrative of the brutish Negro was also the narrative of America as a just nation, where anyone from anywhere can come and find their fortune. We were the land of opportunity. Those garish images of little children being blown back. I think about my son. My son is 41 pounds, blown back by the force of water from a fire hose. The unspeakable evil of seeing a dog intentionally turned on a child with the intent to harm. That march and the ensuing response turned the tide of public opinion in support of civil rights for justice. And so part of what allows hate to continue is an unwillingness to look at yourself. And America, until that moment, had refused to look at herself. So wherever you see hate perpetuated, you will find a person, a community, or a country that refuses to see itself. And it is Socrates who said that the unexamined life is not worth living. Even today, 52 years after his death, Dr. King's life challenges us to look at that part of ourselves, to shine a light on the parts of our hearts and our minds that need to be held accountable. All of us have a shadow side. We are fooling ourselves if we think we don't. So the question is, what are the places in your life where you are unwilling to shine the light? Perhaps there is a place on the job or in your community or in your family where somebody needs to flip the switch. Because what I know for sure is that you compromise your own greatness when you refuse to shine the light. You are only as great as your willingness to shine a light on the darker parts of your soul. Now, it may help for me to share with you Dr. King's understanding of greatness because, we throw that word around very frequently today. And so I want to be real clear on how he saw greatness. Quoting Jesus, he says, "He who is greatest among you shall be your servant." And what that means is that everybody can be great because everybody can serve. He says you don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make your subject and your verb agree to serve. You don't have to know Plato and Aristotle to serve. You don't have to know Einstein's theory of relativity to serve. You don't have to know the second theory of thermodynamics in physics to serve. You only need a heart of love generated by grace, and you can be that servant. The reason that greatness is accessible to you is because true greatness is found in service to others. So one of Dr. King's models, Mahatma Gandhi, said, the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in service to others. And Dr. King did that. Now, you may not know this, but Dr. King grew up well-to-do. You may know that. His grandfather was a preacher. His father, Daddy King, was a preacher. And in fact, Daddy King was friends and colleagues with Jimmy Carter. So Dr. King grew up privileged, well-to-do, with a level of access that many don't realize he was born into. He graduated high school at 15, went to Morehouse, finished Morehouse at 19, went to Crozer Theological Seminary, became president of his class at Crozer, and then got an invitation to come to Boston University to finish his PhD, did that by 26. But when he returned to Georgia, accepting his assignment at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, he made a specific choice to involve himself in the struggle for civil rights. Daddy King was staunchly opposed to him being involved because they had a life of relative privilege. And this son of privilege decides to risk it all to align himself with poor communities who were sick and tired of being sick and tired. Rosa Parks wasn't the first person to be arrested for refusing to give up her seat. She was the one that people could rally around. And so the women organized the boycott, and then they elected Martin to basically be the face of it. And Daddy King was very unhappy about his son's decision. What kind of man gives up a life of privilege to align himself with the underprivileged? Dr. King had this unfailing commitment to service. He gave up everything to take a stand for justice. You know, being on the road the way that he was meant that money was not coming into the house. A lot of people, some people know this, that Harry Belafonte funded the family for years, and that's what allowed him to be on the road. And so he died broke. As I prepared this talk today, the thing that I couldn't get out of my head was that he had a choice. He had a choice. See, class has always been a thing in the African American community. It doesn't get a lot of attention in the mainstream, but it's something that you're acutely aware of in the culture. Affluent African Americans live in exclusive communities. They send their kids to specific schools. They expose them to things that other African American students never experience. Many of them are educated in either private or boarding schools, and they support specific causes. Often there is a disconnect between affluent African Americans and their poorer brothers and sisters. And there's this feeling of, I pulled myself up by my bootstraps in this race, this country. Why can't you? And then on the other end of that is the feeling that, well, you know, they always let one or two through. And so I can remember growing up in Houston, Texas in the 70s and 80s and knowing about the children from these affluent families. They lived in an area of Houston called McGregor Park. Now, this neighborhood was populated with expansive mini mansions, well-manicured lawns, and fancy cars. And I can recall learning about the kids who were a part of Jack and Jill, which is a Tony social service club that the children of prominent blacks were in. And they traveled all over the country getting exposed to things that I would never see. And I remember longing to be a part of that group. I remember my mom wanting us to have that kind of privilege, but we just didn't have the finances to fit in. And ironically, I actually interacted with a lot of these kids because I had a cousin who lived in McGregor Park who was an attorney. And so I would travel with him to the National Bar Association conferences. But, you know, it was still kind of an outside looking in type of situation because I was the cousin and not the daughter. And I remember one of the girls that I had met from the conference got a Mercedes for her 16th birthday. Now, I know that that is not a big deal today. And we live in Glendale, so I know that really don't make a difference. But just go with me. This was Houston, Texas. It was the 80s. That's a big deal. When I was a junior in high school, I was selected as one of 10 students in the city of Houston to travel to Israel for the summer. 2 of the other girls in the group were from McGregor Park and were a part of Jack and Jill, so I really got to see their life contrasted with my life. My mom barely scraped together $300 for me to travel abroad for the entire summer. And while these girls spent lavishly on souvenirs, I only had enough money to eat. I didn't bring back one souvenir from that life-changing trip. Got a lot of memories, but no souvenirs. And so when I learned that King grew up well-to-do as a black kid, I knew what that meant. And then to think that he gave it all up to align himself with the underprivileged. What manner of man is this? He was on fire for justice. He was on fire for peace, for love. He shows you what life looks like when you get on fire for something. Because when you're on fire for something, it transcends your personality. Last year, we had a sermon series at my church based on King's book. It's a book of sermons called The Strength to Love. And I remember when I first cracked it open, I thought, how did he preach these sermons? Because you need a PhD just to read them. And so I'll tell you something. So the way that I speak has changed over time. The more I speak, the simpler and simpler my words get. As someone who is a proud nerd, prone to big words, I have learned that people don't half know what you're talking about if they don't know the words that are coming out of your mouth. I think it was Ywca Badu that said, what good do your words do if they can't understand you? Yes? I look at the sermon notes that I used to put in the bulletin, they read like dissertations. Today, you get that bulletin, basic. And so when I started digging into the strength to love, I kept saying, he said this in 1955? He preached that in 1963? What manner of man is this? What I have found is that when you are on fire, the message of your soul transcends your personality. And so you need to be on fire for something because this man with the big words, with the polished education, with the Nobel Peace Prize, had a heart for those who could not speak for themselves. This fire burned within him and brought him from the ivory towers and connected him with the man on the street. He took up the cause of garbage workers, seamstresses, domestic workers. The people he served had never been where he'd been and had never seen what he had seen, but they felt like they had an advocate in Dr. King. He could translate their hurt into words the oppressor could hear. Every hurt needs a voice. See, I think we all want to feel significant, and I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to feel significant and being important, but you will never become important until someone else's hurt becomes important to you. You will never reach the heights that your soul is intended to soar until you take what comes to you naturally and put it in service to someone else's hurt. A life well lived is a life lived in service to others. And so Dr. King took his gift for elocution and gave it in service to a people who were reaching for what they wanted but didn't know how to language it. Every hurt needs a voice. One of Dr. King's friends, someone who traveled with him a lot, said that he was a natural preacher. He could just show up and sermon would tumble out. And I want to tell you that is not what happened to get ready for today. I want you to know there were hours that went into this moment. But he had this way with words that he could just make pictures pop into your mind. You know, you couldn't hear him without feeling this electricity. And so the thing that I ask you is, what is that thing that you do that so naturally that you barely have to prepare for it? Because each one of us has something that we are most likely taking for granted. And we take it for granted because it really doesn't cost us anything to do it. But if we will take it and use it in service to another person, not only will it liberate us, but it will bring us a joy that we won't have words to describe. Every hurt needs a voice. And a life well lived begins with taking your voice, whatever that looks like, and putting it in service to someone else's hurt. Several years ago, I worked with an organization called School on Wheels. Anybody know that organization? School on Wheels, they provide tutors to students in homeless shelters and other transitional housing. And I was assigned this kid, Delino. At the time, I think he was like 11 or 12. He was behind in school, probably had some type of learning disability. It might have been undiagnosed. But they lived in a shelter in North Hollywood. And once a week, I would travel to this shelter to tutor him. Now, he had a little brother named Raynell. Raynell was maybe 8. And Raynell would crash every tutoring session, every last one. And I would entertain him for a few minutes, and then I'd say, okay, Raynell, it's time for me to work with your brother. And then he, let us work. Well, one afternoon, I show up to tutor Delino, and Raynell is there per usual. And I guess I had like a class on life purpose or something that we had just done at my church. And so I asked the boys what their life purpose was. And they kind of looked at me sideways. And so I explained that, everybody has a purpose. Even if you don't know what it is, you still have one. And I remember Raynell's expression, because he was only 8, but there's something when you see that you can see in children's eyes when life has kicked them so much. And it's almost like there's this hardened exterior, and you can see it in the eyes of babies. It's like they have shut down before they get any more rejection. And they kind of look at you like, why are you talking to me? What's wrong with you? So, I let it go. I told Raynell I needed to work with Delino, and we went on with the tutoring session. Well, work kept me away from the shelter for a couple of weeks. And so I didn't see them for a minute. And when I went back, I checked in, and I sat down in the rec room, and I waited for Delino to come into the room. And, of course, Raynell was right there with him. And Raynell, this 8-year-old, says to me in a sing-songy voice, I know what my purpose is. And so now I'm shocked because, listen, this dude is 8. I got a 6-year-old. They don't hold on to anything. And so I'm thinking, I have been gone for 2, maybe 3 weeks. So I bite. What's your purpose, Raynell? And he said, it's to draw people. And I said, for real? Are you serious? Do you know how great your life is going to be? Do you know what it means that you can do this? And I saw something that gives me chills to this day. I saw hopelessness turn to hope. It was like a shift in the eyes. When I tell you the joy that I felt, no amount of money can replace that. It is that kind of experience that moves you at your core. Every hurt needs a voice. When you take what just comes naturally to you and you give it in service to another, it makes life so rich. You will not have words to describe what it does to you. And so I just stopped by to remind you that you are special. I came to remind you that you need to fan the flame of your own greatness by taking what naturally comes to you and giving it in service to someone else. Everybody can be great. A life well lived begins with giving your voice in service to someone else's hurt. You see, none of us have the privilege of knowing when our last day will be. But the thing I know for sure is that I do not want to get to my last day never having experienced the fullness of who I was supposed to be. The graveyard in many cities is one of the most richest places in most cities. Businesses that were never started, books that were never written, music that went unpublished, inventions that never got created, causes that never found an advocate. And so I encourage you to make a promise to yourself that you will not let another minute pass without doing something about the spark of greatness that lies within you. Thank you.
We're going to take a moment to let that all soak in. Cheri, you have fanned the spark. You have fanned the flame in all of us today. Thank you so much. And this breakfast isn't just about Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It's not just about him. It's about each and every one of you and your life being meaningful, you all being called to service, to transform this community. And I want to thank you already because I know we have firefighters, we have police, we have nonprofit leaders, we have hospital leaders and hospital staff here and others, and you already are giving your lives in sacrifice. But there's a call to continue that, to do more, to be more, and to inspire the others around you to do the same. And thank you, Todd, too, because we are all interrelated. Thank you for your words.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. That concludes the program for this morning. Thank you very much for taking the time this morning to be here and to celebrate the life of Dr. King.